Hey everybody, welcome back to Terminus, the Mexico of extreme metal podcasts. I am the death metal guy, aka Goat Docker, spelled with umlauts.
And I am the black metal guy, aka Burly Goat Men Perpetually Dying.
You know, I have actually failed to do the housekeeping promo shit the past couple episodes, so if you guys want to learn the full story of powerful goat men docking each other and blaspheming Christ, you gotta sign up on the Patreon or Subscribestar to get access to the Discord server where this is how we spent several hours of today.
The content has gotten, I'm highly distraction prone, so back in the day I would just stay off the Discord to not distract myself. In these last couple of weeks the content is so good I can't fucking help it. We were like 4 or 5 hours of Discord. Yeah, nuts.
Oh Jesus, it was a fucking nightmare, dude. I loved it. Every moment.
A beautiful, dark, twisted fantasy.
Exactly. Yeah.
But yeah, so what are the subscriber tiers if they want to dock with our burly goat men?
Okay, so if you just want access to more content for some reason, $3 and up gets you access to the Terminus Prime bonus episodes. $5 and up gets you access to the Terminus Black Circle, our private Discord server where you can learn the deep apocrypha of docking goat men. Oh man, we've got a really cool episode tonight. We are loosey goosey. This is late at night.
There are also a bunch of other tiers.
Oh yeah, there's a bunch of other tiers, but those are excess. Those are if you want to give more money to Terminus. $10 and up gets you access to voting on the Terminus bonus episodes for Terminus Prime, and then if you're at
nobody's at or there are a few people at 20, but they're just people who've subscribed for a really long time who leveled it up.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, 20 does not actually offer you anything special. I love that it's there's tiers that are just dead. You get nothing better than the one before it, but it's we know you're cool. And then you can be a really insane person and be literally Danny Filth at $50 a month, which allows you to just outright submit a record to review, and we do not give a shit what it is. We will do a review of it, and we didn't plan for multiple people to actually take it, but we've got 3 currently, and we'll have to have a talk at one point about how that could be actually very destructive to the show, but we'll cover that another time. We've got a fucking weird stacked old school Terminus episode tonight. Real 2020 energy. It's going to be a long one. We've got a bunch of records to talk about, and they're all over the map musically. You excited about this one? I'm excited about this one.
I'm stoked.
Yeah.
I'm ready to roll. This is a good... You know what? This is a very 2020 energy, but I think, frankly, we've got a better lineup than we could have had in 2020.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
The lineups, aside from that one really eclectic one we did a couple weeks ago, the lineups we've had this year, I've been really, really stoked for.
Yeah, no, I mean, we finally have it down. It only took almost 2 years, but we actually know what the listeners want and what we want. So to kick us off, without further ado, we gotta talk just as a little intro piece about a demo I ran across a while back, but it's just now gotten its cassette release on Nuclear War Now. This is the first demo by Paimon Gate titled 7 Legions. So this was released just on YouTube and stuff, I think a month ago, something like that. But it was known even then that this was going to get a release on Nuclear War Now. The tapes are out now. The vinyl is coming, I believe. And kind of a weird thing. Originally, the promo material described the personnel of this band, but it looks like all that got edited out after the fact. But so I guess they they want to kind of start from ground zero again or something. That's respectable. So that being said, the content of the music will make it very clear to whoever's listening to this show who this probably is. Anyway, so Paimon Gate, Seven Legions, excellent demo of old school Black Death, very in the traditional USBM or US Black Death vein. The notes are going to be obvious to anyone who listens. Profanatica, Havohe, Demoncy, Von, all that sort of thing. But what's interesting to me is that it is, well, one, it's excellent. I'm immediately super stoked for this project. But it's that, you're reaching back to the origin, as we always talk about on the show. But when you reach back to the origin, you're always informed by what's around you. You can never perfectly embody 1988 spirit because you're in 2022. You're not forgetting everything around you. But this is a case where we have a demo of music that is authentically old school, but is also deeply informed and improved by modern technique. So just to, this is going to be a blind listen for you, or a deaf listen, I guess. So let's just listen to one of the samples that I've got off this one. This is going to be the full song, because it's pretty short, called Cardinal Pain Torment. So let's give this one a listen, and then you can give me your initial impressions.
All right.
Right, so Black Metal Guy, what are your first listening impressions of Paimon Gate?
Well, that is very cool.
Yeah, isn't it?
It's much sonically richer than a lot of things in that vein, right? Mm-hmm. Whether it's for some of those are, right? Some things in this primitive Black Death vein are just underdeveloped, others are deliberately austere, right? Mm-hmm. This sounds a lot like that Pro Sanctus and Fairy we reviewed a couple of years ago, Hypnotic Blood Art, which I think I really liked because it had this sort of extreme ascetic primitivism to it, but just this like massive sound, and it kind of sounded like Hellhammer creeping toward Graveland medievalism, which was like definitely an ideal for me. You liked it a little less because it was a departure from their older stuff, right?
Yeah, so for me, Pro Sanctus, the issue was that I really liked their earlier stuff, which was taking kind of the Profanatica format, but then moving in a really technical direction with it. So while I respected hypnotic blood art, it just wasn't what I was looking for. Cool. But then, like, other things that would be akin to this would be, like, that Cultum and Terradum record. We covered, I think, in 2020, the Serpent Throne record we covered last year. Right. A lot of different stuff. I mean, this is a style.
Yeah, so the Cultum and Terradum, right? That and the Prosanctus, and certainly the Serpent Throne, have a deliberate sort of austerity to them.
Yeah.
This is much like, this is the same basic structures. I mean, you get that sort of like confident, sort of like,
that dark arrogance.
Yes, dark arrogance, you know, sort of confidently brutal sort of downbeat drumming. And you get those cascading kind of like, sort of brutalized Dorian scale riffs, right? Really cool. Basically Dorian scale stuff with like death metal chromaticisms thrown in, right?
Yeah.
And so that's awesome. That core of the music is there, as it might be in those other bands. But this was a short track, right? That we listened to a whole track that was
2.5 minutes.
2.5 minutes, yeah. And a lot happened. And the sonic, the last Prosanctus had, all these bands often have a really densely concentrated sound, right? There's just this thick material of guitar and bass, or just guitar, right? And it just sort of like barrels ahead. Here, there's still heaviness and density to it, but there's a lot more, the guitar spreads out vertically a lot more.
There's a ton of color to this music that you don't typically hear in this style. I agree. But I think what you said is important, the whole Dorian melody thing. Now that's kind of that is a part of this style, but what I think is important is that a lot of that back in the day, for these traditional kind of primitive USBM bands, was arrived at very unintentionally. Here we're hearing that with the craftsmanship of a guy or guys who clearly understand exactly how to write those melodies. There's a clarity of form here that was kind of absent in, say, early 90s USBM.
Yeah, for sure. I get that. It's there's like a deliberate thing of like, okay, we're writing things in this kind of like noble sounding martial scale, but deliberately sort of demonifying them in certain ways.
It's like a deliberate
rather than just
corruption.
Rather than just like decomposing a Slayer riff.
Yes.
Which they would have done back in the day. Back in the day, maybe you're instinctively decomposing Slayer riffs. What these bands all do really well, what they did back in the day, and I guess what they're doing more consciously now, is getting out of that kind of like default metal, harmonic or melodic minor thing, right? The sort of the thrash.
Default. I think you're
which
completely
a lot of
right.
Which a lot of modern war metal bands fall into. That sort of, they accidentally end up playing the sort of default thrash thing. This band is not doing that. So that's really cool. But so density of sound. Let's talk about that part at the end. You heard me as we listened, going like, whoa, for like 40 seconds, as those sort of like whacked out like chorused leads or something started coming in.
Yeah. And before we got on the show, I was talking about, okay, so this is kind of like the old school US Black Death, but imagine there's sort of industrial technique employed. Using these sort of sound objects as central figures, like defining figures to the song. And the thing is, there's something like that on every single track on this demo.
That's awesome. It's a bit like, it's sort of like doing the solo as the sound object.
Yes.
So it's one way of taking the Kerry King solo, but like, you know, it's using the Kerry King solo, whereas like, you know, Concrete Winds uses the Kerry King solo as a paradigm for like super brutal default speed metal riffing. This band is using the Kerry King solo as a paradigm for like these kind of like creeping atmospheric riffs like that.
Yeah, and I think that what that comes down to, and I would argue is a major part of all the old USBM, I think we've talked about this before about the Europeans appreciating them, is Morbid Angel. Who I think, as, you know, I mean, you know, crucify me if you want, I'm a giant Morbid Angel fan, but as we've done the show more, it feels more and more like Morbid Angel is so central to so many things. Even outside of death metal, in black metal, in all sorts of different styles across the world. So I think the idea of the solo as a sound object rather than just impressive lead playing is something that's really embraced here.
That makes sense. You can here they're getting the same kind of liquid, slithering vibes as a Morbid Angel solo while deliberately stripping back the technicality. Yeah, exactly.
So speaking of that, speaking of the lead as a sound object, let's listen to a section off one of the longer tracks called The Lord Major Domo.
Dude, also gotta say the song titles.
Oh, yeah.
Like, these are actually, they've read like medieval grimoires or whatever, or like, people do this sort of superficially, but this band, these are just real sick. This is concertedly about hell.
Yeah, you're like remembering when you were a kid, and you're like, oh, this is actually scary.
Yeah, this is actually scary and cool. Like, can I just read the tracks real quick?
Yeah, go for it.
7 Legions, okay, pretty typical, but that's just the warm-up. Supreme Ceremonial Bailiff. Ugh. Cardinal Pain, Torment, pretty typical. King Paimon's Gate, there we go. Geometry of the Inferno, excellent. The Lord Major Domo, and track 7, His Offices of Wicked Command.
I feel like he could have gotten all of these 7 song titles out of the same paragraph of like the Malleus Maleficarum or something.
Yeah. No, it's total just like old school grimoire hunting kind of shit. It's just it's really good. There's nothing like the whole medieval Satanism thing is very clearly articulated here.
Yeah, definitely. Like we were saying, the Lord Major Domo. Let's listen to a section off this, and there's multiple sound objects to dig out of this one. Bro. Bruh.
Bro, you want to go commit some crimes?
Oh, dude, I love doing big crimes. Like, holy shit, man. I mean, that little 2-minute section right there expresses a world of possibility.
There's so many good parts in that. He is so good. Like, this guy's a master of the kind of riff writing I basically love most. Just, like, clearly defined, like, indelibly memorable forms with 4 chords.
Yeah, it's incredible. And it's like, and some of the just ideas that are tucked away in there, like, little bridge riff, that dun 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 dun, that like almost bluesy sort of Motorhead riff, but then with the dun dun dun, that Dorian conclusion, that like standard primitive USBM like Profanatica chord conclusion on it. It's a brilliant idea. Why not just do Motorhead riffs and then put the demonic ending on them? Yeah, sure.
Oh my god, yeah, or the dum dum. I can't remember the exact notes he was hitting. I just remember the rhythm. Dum 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 dum.
Yeah.
So, yeah, like there's a dun 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 dun. The 7-note riff is really cool and kind of has that. It's got the same rhythm as a really elemental kind of spooky riff, which is dun 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 dun. You know, that's some kind of old. That's some kind of very old sort of folk riff or some folk melody or something, and or something. It's some kind of stock melody that sounds really spooky, and there's a version of it there that's really powerful. But I also just love the rolling thing at the end.
It's fucking sick. Like, the moment a full length comes out from these guys, it's in contention for album of the year.
I've actually written that last riff. I've literally written a riff that's like the grinding version of that, like the grinding war metal version of that riff. It's but anyway, yeah, this is fucking sick. The soloing at the end. Someone in the comments wrote, someone needs to tell Morbid Angel to listen to this album for inspiration to get back to their roots.
Hey, it's K.R.I.T from Sepulchre Curse.
And I'm Yaakov.
You're listening to Terminus.
And we are back from continuing to talk about how sick Paimon Gate is to talk now about some more death metal. This time with the split from Rotting Kingdom and Encoffination, Wretched Enigma of Salvation, out on Selfmadegod Records.
Of all things, yeah.
Which is the Polish sort of Polish death grind and hardcore label.
Yeah. Very unusual kind of label for this to come out on.
Unusual because both of these bands play in rather different styles, both from one another and from the label. You know, I guess overall you'd say this is just a sort of extreme death doom record. But they take very different approaches to this. So, Rotting Kingdom is, we can get into it more in a sec, but Rotting Kingdom is a much more sort of gothic and romantic take on it, and Encoffination is much more sort of brutal and primitive. In a way, this is kind of like a very Terminus record, because I've long followed Rotting Kingdom, you've long followed Encoffination. We both love Selfmadegod, and we were tipped off to this by one of our patrons who is friends with the Rotting Kingdom guys.
Yeah, it's the ultimate Terminus record, you know.
Yeah. So we should so overall, you know, this is one of those splits that is, you know, some splits seem just like almost perfunctory thing. Like, okay, we need to release some music to get momentum for the next record. Let's do a split. Or like, hey, these guys are chill. We've played shows together. Let's do a split. This one seems like they planned it in advance. And, like, maybe the concept is kind of that they've decomposed the Peaceville Doom Death formula into like, two different sides.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense to you?
Rotting Kingdom, definitely. Encoffination, I have my own ideas about where their sound comes from, but I'm sure they're into the most dismal sides of the Peaceville thing. Definitely.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, that's fair. I think they are coming out of a different tradition. But, like, as a shorthand way of explaining this record, imagine the two sides of Death Doom split into the two halves of the record.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you've mentioned Encoffination on the show before. I've mentioned Rotting Kingdom, and, you know, I don't really know Encoffination at all, but, so why don't I lead us off with Rotting Kingdom?
Yeah, we both, we can both speak to either side of this split.
Yeah. So these guys are, central to the Lexington, Kentucky scene, which is, not very well known outside of the most hardcore underground USBM and underground metal circles. However, is extremely authentic, and, you know, something I've respected for a long time and should be better known. And this band should be huge. They've been around since, I think, 2017. They've done an EP and an LP, and now they're doing this. So they've taken their time to mature the sound. The record, A Deeper Shade of Sorrow, made my number 11 for the Terminus Omega list in 2020. And it really scratches a certain itch for me because they play what I call, like, bulldozer gothic doom death. It's kind of this, it's not really doomy. It's sort of upper mid-tempo, driving kind of rock beats with double bass, you know, doom ta doom ta doom ta doom ta, you know, and it seems really influenced by this band October Tide, which was kind of an alternate universe Catatonia for a minute in the 90s. Shared the main guy with Catatonia. It may be also, maybe they're also influenced by November's Doom, which is a band you know better than I know, but I've gone back to recently.
You are completely right about the November's Doom thing. I kind of had my doubts when I saw you wrote that in the notes, just because I know you're not super familiar, but you're pretty much on the money. I bet November's Doom is kind of central for these guys. For those who aren't familiar, November's Doom is definitely on the kind of romantic, melodic side of Doom Death, but still has really aggressive, gnarly, more death metal parts in it. They're kind of singular these days for that style, as far as, like, better-known bands go.
Yeah, I remember I heard a bit, I went back to some albums more recently, but I remember when I was just getting into metal, I found some of their shit on, like, MySpace or whatever, and it definitely had this kind of bulldozering sound. Like, it was death doom, but, like, fast and groovy. These guys have an influences list on the promo for Wretched Enigma. Maybe this was seeded, that reference was seeded in my mind by the list, but Rotting Kingdom play doom death that brings you the memory of British doom scene and bands such as My Dying Bride or Anathema, as well as Ceremonium, Morgion, Catatonia, Enchantment, and November's Doom. Encoffination offer, you can read that list later, but they have their own very cool list of influences. So in the past they had this sort of bulldozer doom death thing, and it allowed them to bridge freely into other things. They had a free idea of what could be brought into this style. So you would get kind of parts that were just almost bolt throwery, and you get parts that were all just the goth stuff, almost just direct, like Sisters of Mercy. No clean vocals or anything, just like you can tell they really understand the goth thing. This record seems like a deliberate step away from the characteristic tempo-pushing bulldozer thing. And it's a push away, and it's a leap away in some kind of an unexpected way, which, especially on the first of their tracks, I might think I'd like it less, but it's actually just as cool and pretty interesting. So, should we get to a sample?
What?
Should we get to a sample?
Oh, I thought that was the break for a sample. All right.
Yeah. All right.
You had that big pause. I just hit play.
Oh, all right. So this is so we're going to Misery Eternal. We're about 4 minutes in, and this is you can hear the sort of lower tempos, more rhythmic space, and this is kind of a left turn for them.
So, as someone who hasn't listened really to Rotting Kingdom before this, how is this distinct from their previous work? Because you were making a point of that.
Yeah, well, so the heavier part at the beginning, that wouldn't be out of place as one of the slower parts on their previous stuff. But on their previous things, those work more as sort of like punctuating moments in various ways, like beginning of a track, change up in the middle of a track, or like big chorus part where the sort of more open swinging rhythm allows you to make these, kind of big, long, tall architectural doom riffs, right? And the sort of goth guitar playing over it, very Sisters of Mercy, is also characteristic of their earlier stuff. So you've got the massive riff substratum, and then this like bonus part that's this sort of intricate goth lute harmony playing around it. That's characteristic of them, and you could hear the double bass filling in under as it went on. That also is, definitely their kind of thing. So you get some of the maximalism there. But then this sort of, I'm sure they had some parts with a bit of this on their earlier stuff, but it really just opens up there at the end. And you start to get these, they're sort of like Peaceville Doom Death leads, right? But they're cut loose from their foundation and just kind of chasing each other around in the ether. And it sounds almost, it sounds almost hard rock, which, as you know, is a sound that you have more time for than me.
Except when it's gothy, then you have all the time in the world for it.
Exactly, yeah. Well, I mean, One of the things about bands like the Sisters and Fields of the Nephilim was that although they were influenced by, like, you know, the sort of post-punk goth stuff, which, you know, still had that sort of punk minimalism to it, they sort of broke the stricture against hard rock influence. Mm-hmm. And, like, for better and worse, I mean, I think both could be accused of cock rock or bloat in certain ways, right? Like, sorry, the Rolling Stones aren't actually cool. But, like, Pink Floyd's not actually cool. But they took those influences and made cool shit with them, you know? So here, yeah, so I guess they're using this sort of hard rock thing, but in a kind of textural way. So it starts to almost sound with the sort of... They're swinging it so much it starts to kind of float, and
yeah, you've got that you know, swaying twilight feel. You know, you're having a very nice ceviche dish on the deck, overlooking the beach. You know, when that lead kicks in. You know, and I'm not saying that is a bad thing. I think that's cool. I mean, really, what I think you're kind of talking around is like, oh, this is Hanging Gardens with death metal reinserted.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great comparison, actually. Like, a little more... I don't think Hanging Gardens is ever spacey, but this is a lot like Hanging Garden.
Well, this song in particular, yeah.
Yeah. For sure, that's a very good comparison. And, you know, it takes the goth thing so far in the floaty direction that it starts to almost feel like early Slowdive stuff, which is still very gothy. Like, it almost gets like you're making shoegaze, but with this... But instead of with guitar texture, with intertwining fancy leads, and with, like, this substructure of doom death heaviness still. Which is a really cool idea. And I thought, like, could I listen to a full album of this? And I decided I probably could.
Yeah, definitely. But I think that's also augmented by the second song.
Yes.
So... It's only 2 relatively long songs per side. You know, we've sampled off of all of them. It's only about a half hour total. I would think if there is a criticism for this record, it's I could use a song extra a piece, I think, to really fully develop all the ideas, but all the material here is really good. So, as a guy who hasn't heard Rotting Kingdom before, this really struck me off of the second track, The Road of Grief and Ashes. There's some really cool kind of hybrid riff ideas on Rotting Kingdom's side. These seem to be guys that are really interested in the liminal space between sort of romantic doom death and more aggressive sort of, you know, maybe autopsy influenced doom death stuff. Doom death versus death doom, if you want to say it like that. So the Road of Grief and Ashes is heavier and more aggressive. So let's listen to this section and pay attention to the main obvious riff you're going to hear, because it is one of the best riffs on this record completely. So yeah, I mean that main riff, that stem riff from which everything elaborates from, is outstanding. And it really all comes down to a really simple modulation, which you pointed out. You think it's like a minor sixth on the bass.
So the main melody is something like dum da da da. Okay, typical so far. Doom,
Yeah.
like Death Humor. Dum da dum 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 dum. Dum 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 dum. It sort of hangs up. That riff normally descends for variations on that stock thing, and the guitar hangs suspended in these kind of more dissonant intervals on the end of the riff. I can't frankly hum it because it's sort of elaborate. But yeah, so you were saying there's something about the bass lift that really makes that. And I had to listen for it, but you're right. The bass is doing more rhythmic stuff underneath it. And then I think it rises just like, yeah, something simple and just metal, like a minor sixth or something. And it sort of starts encroaching on the territory of the guitar for a minute.
Well, yeah, you know, because the bass is just doing this like simple walking bass line, holding down the root note, and then there's this lift like that minor sixth you were talking about, and all of a sudden it completely recontextualizes the tension of the riff over it. It's a very, very simple but very subtle technique. Something similar to the kind of shit that we heard when we on a bonus episode when we covered that Nyctalgia record. Remember all the kind of like subtle bass manipulation across the riffs on that record?
I think so, yes.
Yeah. I really love it when a band can do that.
You know, Satanic Warmaster does that a lot too.
Yeah, so there's a lot of subtle technical things you can do with a bass, you know, that don't require any like special elaborate technique, but have a way of manipulating melodic lines from the guitar around them in this really cool way. And this is a great example of that. And additionally, I really like how this main riff here becomes those first four notes become the stem melody of like every riff after it. You know, everything is distinctly related to that main melody, which like they immediately seized on. They realized, oh, this is a fucking brilliant riff. How many ways can we extrapolate off of this? Which is, you know, that's just good technique. If you have something good, don't just play it once. Find different ways to vary it, find ways to play with it, and just, yeah, you know, reap the fruits of it.
Yeah, so that bridges into another thing, which is that everything here is bespoke and intentional. There is no part of this where the musician isn't writing.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if it's multiple, how many writers are involved, but every single part is, there's nothing that's default or filled in. So, let's talk about that area where they up the tempo at the end. First, I gotta eat my hat. That part has the bulldozer beat. So, you know, like, it does occur less than it did on the other stuff, but they certainly throw into it at the end of the track, which is sick. As they're doing that, you start to get, on the one hand, there's this kind of elaborate, thick lead part. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, there's a left channel guitar being played with a, like, reverb goth effects. I guess probably the same guitar that was doing the Sisters of Mercy embellishment around the riff early in the earlier track. There's this, like, left channel guitar, and it's, he's, like, playing, like, a Christian death goth guitar solo over it. Like, just using a few notes, but just kind of, like, wailing in this sort of just doing these, like, really intense bends and stuff, with this sort of gorked tone. And it's subtle to hear, but it adds a lot, and it's interacting with the main riff. And it's this whole other bonus tier of the song that you might not initially even notice. So, yeah, this is really good.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely stoked to hear this, and I'm gonna have to go back, like I threatened to last time you talked about Rotting Kingdom, and actually listen to their last album.
And I think with the range they're experimenting with here, I think they're gonna have, the last one was just a really sort of focused effort in kicking ass. You know, this, which is great for a first record. I think they now have they've conquered the new sonic territory they need to make a just really sort of fully fleshed out masterpiece of an album.
Yeah, and we are going to be here for it, you know. Mm-hmm. Anyway, Encoffination. All right, that's Encoffination. Just a low, quiet gurgle for 15 minutes. So I am the big Encoffination guy. Love this band to death. I have a t-shirt. I saw them live one time, and it was like if two granite walls were slowly crushing you, but like moving at like glacier speed, like 6 inches a year kind of stuff. It was awesome. There were 2 guys on stage, and they were more brutal than 6 guys, you know, in many other bands I've seen before.
So drums and guitar, or a drum machine?
Drums and guitar. Yeah. So Encoffination is a sort of, I mean, it's really a band that is a side project of guys who do a bunch of other stuff. The personnel that were there when I saw them was Electrocutioner, you know, Wayne on drums, and Goat from Father Befouled on guitar and vocals. And both of these guys are in Father Befouled together. Both of these guys have been, I think, in a couple things together.
Didn't we review some record for... Well, actually, we've reviewed a couple things by guys in this scene.
The Conjureth record.
The Conjureth, and it also turned out that there was that, like, kind of wild rock and roll Swedish Black Death record that came out on Sunshine Ward. But I cannot remember off the top of my head what it was. But it was apparently one of the dudes in these bands.
Oh, I know the one you're talking about. Shit.
Yeah, well, I'm looking at the Father Befouled members right now. I can find it. I think it is Thos Ayla. Derek.
Thos Ayla. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, but to describe Encoffination, okay, so it is extremely slow, almost funeral doom, extremely minimal doom death. Encoffination has more to do musically with stuff like Coffins or Anatomia and plenty of bands that aren't from Japan. Winter, stuff like that. But basically it's very extreme, very nihilistic, very ugly, gray doom death stuff. So obviously, you know, describing that, it's almost torture doom. So I love it to death. And this is your first experience with Encoffination. So what do you think, man?
I'm ready to get coffinated.
To be fully coffin-pilled?
Yeah. Yeah, coffin. So I found it, I guess the dominant reaction I have here is that this is one of those bands that is so decoupled from conventional ideas of how to sound.
Yeah.
You know, this is the thing we've said about certain other bands we really like, that they remember that the basic idea of extreme metal was to make things as, you know, disgusting and violent as possible one way or another, right? They're sort of really focused on... Yeah, not on the fetish for the riff that's become so popular, but on delivering certain body and mood effects. And, of course, that actually leads to more interesting riffs. So, here's a good example of a riff that sounds like being not so much crushed between 2 granite walls as like ping-ponged between them kind of slowly. crash cymbal on every single quarter note.
I don't know if there are other symbols for Encoffination. I think he...
Dun, 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 chung, dun, chung, dun, chung, dun, chung, dun.
It was cool when I saw Encoffination, they were playing with Father Befouled, and Wayne was just behind the drum kit for the Encoffination set, and he just hung out. He was like, oh, we're going to do the Father Befouled set. This was his warm-up, you know? Hitting the crash cymbal a lot was his warm-up for the following set.
Dude, yeah, so that riff is absolutely crushing, right? It's just some nasty chromatics, slewing around some nasty chromatics. And it's got this kind of, even though it's very slow, right? You know that the thing I always hate about certain kinds of very slow things is their lack of... Something doesn't have to be fast for me. It just has to have some kind of drive to it. Mm-hmm. And that is a very slow riff that has a lot of drive to it. And it's kind of syncopated in a way that, well, a certain kind of death doom band wouldn't do at all. Like, wouldn't even understand. And it sounds... We were talking about this as we listened to it. That's kind of one of those riffs that exists... You know, it's in touch with a bunch of other bands, but in a way that cuts across genre. Like, it's in a meta-genre of just really nasty stuff. So, like, to me, it reminds me of the more noise rocky parts on the new Ride for Revenge.
Yeah, I mean, it's primordial extreme metal. Like I was saying while I was playing, it was like Encoffination is closer to Mortician than they are to other doom metal bands. Mm-hmm. The whole idea of adhering to certain doom death conventions is completely out the fucking window with Encoffination.
You know, they're kind of more like Reverend Bizarre than some other bands. Like, Reverend Bizarre does shit that's that retarded within a trad doom formula.
Yeah. No, it's like Reverend Bizarre was... there are guys who like trad doom, but they also like being insanely heavy and brutal within that framework.
Yeah, no, they're an extreme metal band for sure. That's a very good example of like the epic doom thing being extreme metal.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But the other thing that it sounds like, well, for people who have listened to the show a lot, one of the closest things that this is to is the Anatomia record from last year that we covered, which was awesome. But the big thing, especially for this next sample that I'm going to play, I think a primary influence for these guys, have you ever heard of a band called Rigor Sardonicous?
I think, because you put it in the notes, but I think only through you. Like, I've definitely heard you've probably, like, put it on the Discord at some point, or played it for me.
Yeah, I put it on the Discord earlier today. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was just thinking about it. I was like, oh, yeah, Rigor Sardonicus. So Rigor Sardonicus is basically, like, almost proto-Encoffination, but, like, done in the late 90s and going through today. Nobody has ever cared about that band except for, very extreme weirdo doom circles. It's a couple guys from Long Island who just do unbelievably slow death metal, basically.
How's it spelled?
Rigor, Rigor, Sardonicous. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Okay, because I was like, they're not even on Metal Archives. Okay, there they are. Yeah, well, they have guns in their pictures from before it was cool, so they're legit.
Oh yeah, they're fucking weirdos, dude. They've just been doing incredibly slow. Winter is probably the closest comparison for those guys, and I think that's a primary influence for Encoffination. Just incredibly glacially slow, incredibly brutal, crushing. Can
you play some for us? Or should we do that as an interlude?
Let's do it as an interlude, just so we stay on task. Yeah. You will like the interlude. I already knew I was going to play a Rigor Sardonicus song as the interlude after this. But anyway, so imagine this crushingly slow, incredibly minimal, not beholden to the standards of what a quote-unquote doom band should be. and then listen to a sample off Encoffination's Agonal Soul. What fucking nightmarish music, man. Like, I love when people do doom metal as extreme metal, which is a thing that's like almost forgotten nowadays, that doom metal is not, for you and your girlfriend to, kiss to. It's supposed to be, you can do doom metal that's like brutal and weird and uncomfortable. And Encoffination does that better than almost anybody these days. I mean, just the sparseness. When everything drops out, you're just sitting on those big open notes. Oh, dude, there's nothing like it out there today.
It's... Okay, the real, a part that really struck me is when his growl verges into a chant.
Yeah.
He's so focused on the deep guttural thing and not on being loud that it seamlessly turns into a goth vocal. It's like the most extreme goth vocal ever, which makes it pair really well with Rotting Kingdom. But also just the thing about that is it's almost like they just said, okay, during this part we're going to play notes, but they're going to be completely arbitrary.
Well, there's also something that's interesting, like in that break part toward the end of that sample. You've just got the drums and you've got the plucked notes.
Yeah.
And even the growls, it's all, even though it's been compressed together, it's very quiet, isn't it?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
There's a weirdness to that. It's so heavy, but it's so quiet at the same time. This mastery of this sort of like insidious dynamic quality is pretty unique to this band.
And we are back from talking about how the death metal guy's cat has borderline personality disorder to discuss Hexapoda Triumph by Downcross.
Oh, he's such a bad boy.
on Cavum Atrum Rex, yes, and so we are here to discuss Bad Boys from Belarus. This is a weird record. I'm really glad I found this. This was a random Bandcamp find.
You were attracted by the album art, weren't you? Which
the album art is
fucking sick.
Yeah, how would you describe it?
Oh, it's a horrible fly man with various occult symbols carved into him, stabbing the world, surrounded by other dirty insect boys with various weapons.
Yeah, this is some serious actually likes metal shit. The cover is fantastic. It's an totally independent release, but these guys, I don't know if they designed it or if they had a friend who did it. Cover art by Svarta Plagor, Roy Reese. Well, Roy nailed it, and these guys are releasing.
Isn't it released on a Cavum Atrum Rex? Or?
Yeah, so I don't know Cavum Atrum. Who is that? Oh, sorry, independent. Yeah, good point.
Oh, well, Cavum Atrum has only released Downcross, so I guess it's their own imprint.
There you go. So it's a very professionally self-released thing, and they've got this awesome cover art, and they've already put out sick merch, which I guess is fair game if the music is this good. So let's talk about it. This is like, yeah. So it's a 2-guy band. And the track titles radiate a similar insanity. For instance, the lead single was Alpha Beast World Murderer. And so when I clicked on that, I listened to that and was immediately like, oh, this actually is as cool and bizarre as it seemed to be. And I wrote in our notes, whacked out, really angry black metal. From the promo track, primary influences appear to be Migla and Sonic Youth. That's really just that track, but there's something about it. What would you say of the overall? What would you say the overall sound here?
This is pretty all over the place, but seems to have a through line to it. I think that through line is mayhem, especially like both early and late. I think these are guys that appreciate Grand Declaration and the stuff after it. There is an obvious streak of sort of black and roll stuff, but not in the sense that you might be imagining. These are very dynamic songs on this record. Mm-hmm. Both musically and in terms of mood. Like, it's weird to describe a black metal record in this way, but it's very emotionally expressive. There's a lot of interesting shades of feeling that are explored on individual songs. I think that all of these tracks are supposed to be kind of distinct stories in a way. They have very kind of narrative flowing constructions. They might not seem entirely sensible the first time you hear them, but on repeated listens, they really gel together a lot better. As far as musical comparisons, I would say it's a lot of mayhem. It's a lot of sort of 2000s black and roll stuff, and it's informed by a lot of like more modern melodic stuff as well.
Yeah, so, I mean, you're going to have to show me the mayhem thing. That was not my first thought. But we definitely, somewhere on their promo material, they say something about, which I can't find specifically, maybe it was on, like, Bandcamp messages or something, but they say something about, like, they say something kind of, something like black and roll. It's some sort of similar blank and roll label. So they almost maybe don't even think of themselves as a black metal band strictly. Mm-hmm. I think this kind of outmoded black and roll style, right, was connected with a lot of very static kind of slow parts of early Dark Throne songs or slash have, Satan Forfend, later Dark Throne songs. And for everything that was good in that style, there was like 25 things that were terrible, right?
Yeah.
So it was a sort of a trend from the trenchcoat days, right? The early 2000s, or the 2000s, all of them. But this band definitely takes that as a starting point, and we've started to hear that a little bit more. So a band that we both like in that style, I think is really good, is Avsky. And you can hear the attitude being similar here to Avsky, the sort of like, fuck your values, fuck your beliefs, sort of nuclear bomb the whole world, fuck it, man, kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely.
Similar, intense non... so many bands describe themselves as misanthropic, and what the fuck do they mean, right? But this is just like, spitting at random strangers in the street kind of shit.
Yeah.
Avsky had that. And the way they seem to do that is, the weakness of a lot of that music was that, the riffs were terrible. Very...
Yeah, like with unerring accuracy, they always landed on the worst possible riff.
Yeah, just take kind of like Dark Throne riffs and like try to make them sort of like bluesy. Yeah. But so this band understands that limitation. And it's like they're using black and roll as a format to mean heavily mid-paced stomping stuff or heavily mid-paced stuff that isn't modern sort of oi-based stomping black metal, right? Mid-paced groove black metal that has blasting parts, but the blasting parts are strictly for punctuation and big riffs, and it's not even fast blasting. So they've got this idea of a form, really general formal idea, a framework, and then they've got the idea of this mood they're trying to deliver, of like total spite and insanity. And in between that, they just fill it in with all sorts of they fill that form in with all sorts of different content. So that song to song, you're going to get a bunch of different kinds of big riffs. It gives the record... It's one of those things that really does sound like they listen to everything. And they've kind of thrown everything in here, but it never sounds superficial and eclectic.
Yeah. Well, one thing I want to draw attention to is, you talked initially about the idea of, as you described in the notes, like, oh, McGlaw meets Sonic Youth. I think the Sonic Youth thing kind of applies, but from a different direction. Maybe the idea that these are guys who are listening to, say, experimental rock, post-punk, weird kinds of hardcore, but they're not taking those things for granted. They're right. like say these guys are listening to, let's say, a goth band like Suicide, and they're like, oh, this is supposed to be pissed off and weird.
Oh, no, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
We should listen to your sample, because this is a really good example of this. So you sampled from the lead single track, Alpha Beast World Murderer, and the core thing about this was, like, a part of this really does sound like Sonic Youth riffing anywhere from, what is it, Halloween to, what's that? Sorry, wait.
I like it. How you're like, which one was it? Yeah, I'm gonna fucking know about Sonic Youth.
Well, I do. Bad Moon Rising.
No, me.
I was saying it to myself. Bad Moon Rising. They start to get really, that's a very gnarly record, but like anything from that through Daydream Nation is particularly gnarly. Daydream Nation has a much nicer production, but like there's a lot of really gnarly sort of dissonant sort of prepared guitar tunings on that. And this record does that kind of thing. There are even tracks on Daydream Nation that sound kind of like Slayer. Like Cross the Breeze is basically their take on a Slayer song. And the only thing that makes it not super gnarly is the kind of like fuzzed out, more gentle production. This band takes the ugliest parts of Sonic Youth in that time and makes sort of really nasty rock and black metal riffs with it.
Yeah. So, Alpha Beast World Murderer. I didn't realize this was the single off the record, but ended up sampling it anyway. So, I think that, like, for instance, the opening riff on this sample is extremely Grand Declaration to me.
Okay.
Then we're going to get into some more of that kind of post-punk Magla stuff from there, but I think the Mayhem thing will be obvious, like, with me pointing it out. And then let's dig into the kind of outside black metal stuff we're hearing. So after hearing that, with me kind of noting the idea of Mayhem, like Grand Declaration specifically, for that opening riff, does that make a little more sense to you?
Yeah, the opening series of riffs, the sort of like big swinging 6/8 ones. And, you know, the first of those is that kind of like it's the typical Norwegian take on the Children of the Grave riff, but like with much skronkier intervals.
Yeah, you gotta do that skronky descending arpeggio, man. That's classic blasphemer stuff.
I get that the mood they're going for throughout is very Grand Declaration of War, just sort of pure spite.
Yeah. So in terms of the Magla thing, I can definitely see that as being a possibility, but there's something about this whole record that makes me think that's not a primary influence. I don't have any evidence to back that up, but I was listening to this and I was thinking, a lot of the stuff that sounds like Magla, you could probably get there from Enslaved in particular. Especially their mid-era, more proggy stuff. Because Enslaved actually, thinking back, did a lot of Magla-style things before Magla really popularized it. I just don't get the sense that these are guys necessarily really interested in very popular black metal trends. I can be completely off base with that, but
I certainly think the thing that sets this record apart is that they're not like enamored of Magla.
Yeah.
They're not like they're not certainly trying to be that band, and they don't want to be that kind of band remotely. And they listen to a ton of different shit that's much older and grittier.
Yeah.
I could sort of hear, does Enslaved have those big kind of open minor kind of hooks? I don't remember that.
Yeah, I mean, you got to listen to all those mid-era records like Issa. When are you going to listen to...
I listened to Rune. Rune doesn't have those.
Rune, not to the same degree. Issa
Rune has some, like, cool... Like, Rune has cool riffs, but to me, like, no spirit.
Listen to Issa. That's the record I always talk... I talk about that on, like, a 3-month rotation on this show.
You do.
One day you're going to listen to it.
Well, so I have no doubt... The point is, like, these guys... I mean, they also seem like kind of older dudes. They might be older than us. And so I'm sure they listened to Enslaved. I mean, I'm sure they listened to, like, all that to Avsky or whatever right when it's coming out. I'm sure they listened to... You know, they're clearly not part of this new generation of people who don't listen to the Norse stuff, right? So it makes sense. The reason I think Migla is just, like... The sense I have is that, well, first of all, they're just exactly from that neck of the woods, from Belarus. These guys could have seen Migla live like 10 times. You know what I mean? Like, they could be friends with the guys in... They could be friends with the guys in that band. And they're... And I get the sense that this record is an attempt to do... It doesn't sound any... Like, this is one of the tracks that sounds most like that. Many songs throughout here have nothing that could be considered a Migla riff. So it might not be central for their sound at all. But on this track, for sure, like, that big break where the blast riff comes in, that... And then you agreed that, like, the more sort of rockin' thing after it sounds pretty Migla.
That's very Migla,
yeah.
The one after
So
that.
the things that it doesn't necessarily sound like Migla specifically, but that, like, big elaborate riff, which is basically written in Migla minor, but is a lot more complex, sounds like really like the kind of stuff that's written in the immediate social circle of Migla. Like, the guys who play live in Migla have these other bands, like Over the Voids, or Ashes, or Owls, Woods, Graves, and they all have a similar ear.
Okay.
Like, you can tell they're kind of, like, slightly younger than the dude from Migla and profoundly interested in that shit, but, like, doing their own thing.
Yeah.
You know, there really is that... People don't really talk about it as a scene, but that has... It's a scene with its own idiom. It's the Malignant Voices scene. We reviewed the Ethel 1710 from that way back at the beginning of Terminus.
Oh, that was like the second episode or some shit. Yeah.
So that was doing something that was a little outside that sphere. They were consciously trying to do kind of a black and roll thing. But so this sounds like it's part... This could belong to part of that scene, but it could equally belong to the scene around Putrid Cult, right?
Yeah,
like,
Putrid Cult, I definitely got off this when you
like
mentioned
older veteran dudes, older veteran dudes from the western part of Eastern Europe who want to make stuff that is sort of difficult and not accommodated to contemporary trends.
Yeah.
The funny thing is, I think your sample actually skipped the part that sounds most like Sonic Youth, but it's at the beginning of the track. Listeners can find it. And the thing it really sounds like often is the stuff on Sister and the most slayery stuff off Daydream Nation. But yeah, so let's go to, for some of the more nasty black and rollish stuff, let's go to my next sample. This is Where Spheres Myroblice with Pus. Lysine is when a cell breaks, so I'm guessing this has something to do with that. We're going to build to a really rockin' part, but you're going to hear it. It's not like... it doesn't have any of the goofy quality that some of that stuff had back in the day.
Yeah, because most of the black and roll bands wouldn't be willing to get that kind of country and bluesy.
That's true. I mean, they would throw in kind of bluesy licks and it'd be kind of cringe. But I know what you mean.
They would not just
it usually
bear down on a whole... Yeah, they wouldn't bear down on a whole riff like that.
It usually accidentally sounds like Pantera.
Yeah.
Yeah, that riff is really cool because it's, full bore, kind of like bluesy southern rock or doom metal or whatever. And so it has that American influence, and you could trace it back to black music even, right? But it also sounds Nordic. Like, it sounds like pagan. You could get a riff kind of like that on a Bathory record. And it's a composite riff, right? You've got the greasy sort of blues slides. Oh, the other thing that sets it apart, like you were saying about them fully committed to it, is that it really has that kind of musician-y inflection in the grace notes there. The
you know what the real difference is? Downcross actually respects that riff.
Yeah.
It's not like, oh, we're like... That was the thing with black and roll. It's like we're a little bit too cool for this, which is what makes it cool when we play this. Downcross is like, no, this is good music.
Oh, the other bands also just associated riffs like that with a certain kind of really flat affect, which is like goat, sex, and booze or whatever.
Yeah.
And they're playing them in the way mid to late era Darkthrone played things, which is like dragging power chords around, right? And so you can hear the respect for that riff in the way they play it. Just the sort of like the trilled grace notes and shit. Or not trilled, but the kind of the bending and the
little swing time thing going on. Yeah.
And so that has the bluesiness in it. And then the turnarounds, although the turnarounds would all fit in blues scales, that just descent to the minor seventh, dum, dum, and then coming back at the end to dum, dum, right? That's
straight Conan shit, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's Conan blues, which you can trace back to the Stooges in some sense, but like...
Everything comes back to the Stooges with you.
Yeah. Well, it's people with a deep respect for the blues doing something else, right? But like also but also Bathory, and I think even more relevant, if you take the whole riff in its compound form, the whole thing is a Danzig riff. It's really close to the riff to Am I Demon. And that's just something I want to say here real quick. Danzig is an underrated, rare reference point in extreme metal. Why?
Because he's kind of cringe.
Why do people think that? Danzig's like the coolest dude ever.
Well, he's got a glass jaw, and he had his Facebook hacked, and he insisted that he did not eat hot dogs or his own cum.
He's got 50 cats. He has a lot of bricks in his yard. He has random sex parties. Okay, I see what you mean. However,
the 50 cats is cool, but
However, that's all kind of metal. He's like the ultimate out of touch. He's like out of touch boomer dad of metal. And I think he's kind of actually a weird antisocial hermit. Like, I've heard a lot of... See, this is the thing. Danzig is more of a reference point in the punk scene.
Yeah.
And more of a reference point... And the punks all make fun of him, too, because they think he's too metal, and that the ways he's cringe are metal. But, like, to be fair, I think the glass jaw thing is a bit of a cheap shot, because it was Danzig trying to live his myth. Danzig gets backed into a corner, and he's just suddenly feels like he has to act like his own Conan character, and he's like 55 at least at that point. And he just sort of tough guys it in front of this dude and gets knocked the fuck out. The guy was like twice his weight. What do you expect? Like, I'm not saying it was a prudent decision or a level-headed one, but I will Danzig apologist on this.
You're just... Everybody listening, let the black metal guy know in the comments how that was actually not cool. And how he totally earned it.
Danzig did sort of. It was. I don't like Danzig was like. What was it? The guy was mad that Danzig like. The guy was mad that Danzig bumped him from the set, from like the show, because of some sort of like weird rock star bullshit about time, right?
Oh, I can't... It's been years since I've seen the video, but I can firmly remember that Danzig was definitely the fucking asshole in this situation.
Danzig definitely, like, started the physical aggression.
Well, yeah, this isn't a Danzig podcast, so...
It's,
That's our second podcast for... For $120 and up, you can gain access to that through the Terminus Patreon.
Where we review every what is it? Every comic in the Rotting series, the adult-oriented publishing company pioneered by Danzig.
For that kind of money, shit, I'll do it.
But anyway, point being, Danzig, irrespective of his personal shortcomings, made some really good records, and records that both had that went back through rock and roll to Howlin' Wolf, and also had that Teutonic extreme music thing carried over from the later Misfits. And this band nails that, and I think musically it has a lot to offer people that they just ignore.
That's fair. I mean, Danzig does legitimately have some excellent kind of weirdo off-center kind of primitive goth heavy metal stuff. And I could see these guys actually listening to that. Well, honestly, I could see these guys listening to anything, you know?
Yeah.
This is a record that is all over the place, but in a good way. It feels contiguous with itself, but the influences are just everywhere on this thing. So, which leads us to, are they the section that I guess you were calling the...
Are they actually listening to, or what?
Are they actually listening to, and the just kind of crazy one-off nature, the very specialized song structures. So I want to go to the second to last track on the record, which I think is actually my favorite on the album, Invariant Fall of the Doomed. So let's listen to this and ask yourself the question, holy shit, are they actually listening to Ultra by Spite Extremewing? So we just listened to that sample and we argued the entire time during it. So it's interesting. I think this is kind of a Rorschach test situation, because there's parts of that where I was like, oh, dude, this is Ultra by Spite Extreme Wing. And you were like, no, dude, it's totally Migla. It still fits in with that. And we can both kind of be right on that, but I'm kind of curious, because that big cowboy riff, that second riff in that sample is, I can't point to anything except Ultra for that.
Wait, which one was it? It was
the second big glassy riff with all those open notes after the kind of like windier style riff.
Okay, I'm already on that one. Let's go to the next one. Oh, yeah, no, that's the one that sounds most like something on Ultra. They wouldn't. Spite Extreme would do it rhythmically very differently. I don't think they do the kind of big rockin' backbeat thing. But I hear what you mean about the chording. The jangling kind of. So it's the third riff in, and it's the jangling kind of.
Yeah, my spurs are tinkling on the New Mexico sand, dude.
Yeah, I hear that. It is kind of just a rock and roll riff, but I get that it's the kind, but it sounds very epic in a non-rock and rolly way. So I get how that connects to Ultra.
Yeah, it's that Ennio Morricone stuff.
I'll give you that one. Okay.
How gracious and magnanimous.
I think the stuff towards the end with the, like the turnarounds, like, one has that kind of like the one right before it that you called a windier has this like da 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 turnaround that is very windier but is also very Migla. The last couple variations. The whole song is basically variations on one series of like big rollin' rock riffs, right?
Yeah. But if we're talking about big rollin' rock riffs, the context and the timbre and everything makes a big difference.
No, I agree. I'm just trying to like say that it's kind of like a series of variations on one essential groove. And towards the end, they start turning around in this kind of like blood way, which is a super Migla thing to do. I'm not accusing this band of like trying to sound like, that I'm often very critical of bands that try to sound like Migla. Mm-hmm. I think this is and I could be wrong, I could be totally wrong, because it sounds like these guys listen to tons of stuff, right? Maybe all of the things that I think sound like that do come just from Enslaved and Windier, right? Yeah, all sorts of things. But it in some ways, this seems like a record that does a lot of the things that Migla is famous for. Like having sort of like big, sort of... It has these kind of grandiose epic parts with big simple open minor lead parts and arpeggios. But it has something to do with rock as well, right? Migla got really rocky over the years. Especially on Exercises, but it's kind of always had that. This band kind of has those essential elements, but in a really different configuration with much uglier power chord riffing and much more sort of... Migla plays very physically too, but much more sort of openly and, sort of hairy physicality.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah, I don't know. So... if they do, if they actually listen to Spite Extreme Wing, they would be maybe the second band to...
Well, yeah.
We've said that it's a band we're contractually obligated to mention them 10 times a year, at least.
I think those were the terms. I have to look at the paperwork again.
Yeah. We mention them a lot because we think people should be listening to them more, but almost every time we say, oh, do these guys listen to it? They're like, no, never heard of them. Or like one of those bands where you mentioned it for, they were like, never heard of them before, but checked them out. They're pretty good. The only guy I know who actually listened to them is the dude from Nidstong and Perquinos.
Nice.
Yeah. But anyway, okay, so I guess that we'll have to leave this to this is a debate that only Downcross can decide. So dudes, let us know. Here's for the last sample, I want to go back to the first track. And this is another, you can tell me I'm wrong about this, because maybe this is all from Grand Declaration. But the first track is Trumpets Salute the Demise of Death. You could say that some of the dissident stuff on here is coming from Sonic Youth, but at time, and obviously Grand Declaration for some of them, some of it sounds really informed by like Soren's Apocalypse's Angel, especially on this track. But that feeling is strongest here, and it's like each track will have these distinct reference points and riffing styles. So here's back to the first major track. Neither of those, I mean, dude, those like rock riffs. The first one was like a jump to fuck up riff. Wasn't it?
Yeah, kind of. There's a lot of different kinds of riffs on that sample.
Yeah, one thing that we've kind of said it, but the thing to really emphasize, the thing that's good about this band is they have a basic concept for the kind of thing they're trying to do, and then aside from that, there are absolutely no rules.
All right, we are back with our final record of the night. And, if we're talking old school Terminus, it wouldn't be old school Terminus without a brutal death metal kicker on the end, like a final shot at the end of the night at the bar.
Yeah. A final shot across the bow of good taste.
Exactly. And this time we have the debut full-length, Finally, by Perceptions of Torment, from Gulfport, Mississippi. Third Coast representer, Mississippi Sippin' Lean. Full disclosure up front, Perceptions of Torment are friends of mine. I have played a few shows with them, and one time they crashed on my floor at my apartment playing a show down here in Florida. Nice. They're great guys. Very, very cool dudes. We've been friends with them for a fair number of years now. And so Perceptions of Torment originally did their first EP called Hymns of the Grotesque Mind back in 2015. That got a re-release on Severed Records, I think early last year or late 2020. Mm-hmm. And finally, 7 years later, we have the full-length record, Elegance in Postmortem, also, again, released on Severed Records. And I was very excited to see it. These guys have been, I've always thought of as like unsung gems in the brutal death scene. Not just related to my connection to them, but just objectively they are excellent. So I was very excited to see them come out with, a real record. And I gotta say, the results, speak for themselves. This is an outstanding sort of Texas-style brutal death record. Wonderful riffing, wonderful kind of breakdowns and slams, and kind of some configurations that are unique to this band in particular. All wrapped around a core style that is their own. I'm a practiced guy within this circle, but I would say at this point, I don't think I would confuse Perceptions of Torment for any other band. Over the years, they have really established their own sound, and it's wonderful to hear these songs that I kind of vaguely remember played live finally put to recording. I'm a mark for this. I love this shit. So what did you think, Black Metal Guy?
Well, I don't think I have any really hot takes for this. I think you're going to have to walk me through this one in some ways. It's one of those things that it doesn't have the kind of strangeness of the more avant brutal stuff on New Standard Elite, right? Of your exterminateds or induceds, right? Or molecular fragmentation or whatever. On the other hand, it doesn't instantly turn me off in the way that some of the straight slam stuff does, or things closer to that spectrum, closer to that end of the spectrum. I think I basically respect what this is, and I could maybe use some help getting my hooks in it. A thing I like about it is that it is, it's challenging in the way that this music should be challenging for non-brutal death people, because the production is kind of like, in some sense, it has that deliberately sterile brutal death sound. It has a drum machine, right? Which is, as
I believe
noted,
this is a drum machine. Yeah,
not attempting to disguise the fact it's a drum machine, which is always the best thing. But like, and then the guitar sound, it doesn't have the sort of grave dirt or, plywood 2x4 sound of the early 90s, right? But it has a kind of old school death metal dryness that you would not get in modern brutal death. It sounds inorganic in a way that's difficult for me, sort of like loudness war flat production, but not in the way that was clicky and really annoying in the early 2000s, which seems to really be the focal point for this band, a certain kind of early 2000s sound. So it's like that. It's like the early 2000s brutal death, but with more of a grounding in older stuff. And I think I basically like it sonically. It's like, you know, we each have our kinds of abrasive production we prefer. This is difficult for me. But you know, the more I can focus on it, the more there's a lot to like here. One thing, you know, yeah, the old school dryness sets it apart from, say, big flabby slam type stuff, or like digital bit crushed slam type stuff. I guess, yeah, like what, and you said there's a lot of hardcore on here, and I can definitely hear that, but it's in a very technical framework.
Yeah, so Perceptions is, I think, sort of a definitive example of the Texas brutal death style, which we haven't talked a lot about on the show, but really is kind of a distinct scene unto itself. You know, they call it TXDM, you know, Texas death metal, which is an interesting note, because everything labeled TXDM is brutal death metal, and that kind of suggests something in and of itself. You know, that these guys see brutal death metal as just a part of death metal lineage.
Right.
You know, so what defines Texas death metal? I would say, so obviously we have stuff like Necrovore in the background, but realistically what we're talking about now is sort of an elaboration off of New York death metal. The hardcore influence is still present, but I would say it's more integrally incorporated into the death metal substrate. You know, if you listen to, say, a band like Internal Bleeding or Repudiation or something, the hardcore parts kind of stand out. Here, not so much. They fuse a little bit better into death metal, sort of like very early deathcore in a way. Additionally, I would say there's a technical flair that you can hear in a sense in Suffocation, but it's really brought out in the Texas style. So you've got this conjunction of these really aggressive sort of...
The technicality in Suffocation is more sort of finessed musicianship stuff, kind of like weird, you know, like weird harmonies in places that seem like too fast to throw them in, or whatever. Whereas, like, this is much more like, when people think of technical brutal death metal, this is like, you know, convoluted riffs with lots of notes in them. But it is not masturbatory.
No, there's definitely, like, melodic ideas to a lot of this. The thing that I've always compared this band to, and I've told them this because they were big fans of this band, was Insidious Decrepancy, which is a Texas one-man band from Sean Whitaker that was very influential in the 2000s to the rest of the Texas death metal scene. So you've got the technical flair, but I would say, like, the main thing is that Texas death metal is distinctly mosh music. Even when it's techie, you're supposed to fight people in the pit to it. And I think that really comes across on this record. Like, even... Well, I'll get into the whole idea of, like, the rigidity of what we think is a drum machine. But let's listen to a song. Let's listen to a song with big jump to fuck up riffs. You know? So we're going to listen to the back 2/3 of Immersed in Blood. This is a short record. This is under a half hour. But it stays pretty well. So with Immersed in Blood, I know I was saying, so unlike Internal Bleeding, you know, this has the hardcore more incorporated. But here, this is a track that is clearly derived from Internal Bleeding circa Driven to Conquer. It's fucking sick, and let's listen to it. So, I mean, you can't listen to those stop-start internal bleeding riffs without, trying to kill your pets in your apartment, right?
Yeah. I mean, that is, had I pets, they would be,
I have a cat to bury right now.
That's right, yeah. Oh, yeah, well, that's true. He's been giving you some trouble. That is, all right, you want to play hardball, Wilkins?
Exactly. I think I've said it before, but I love how Wilkins is like a third mic on the podcast at this point.
Yeah. He's our second intern.
Yeah.
But yeah, so yeah, no, that is very sick, and it's funny because when I first listened through it, that's one of the songs that immediately stood out to me, and I was like, oh, I want to sample that one, and I was like, oh, death metal guy got it. And when we finished the sample, the parts that really caught me were at the beginning of the song, but when I finished the sample, I went back and checked the beginning of the song, and it does look like a lot of that stuff repeats towards the end.
Yeah.
So I thought the most impressive part there was that kind of rolling double bass hardcore thing with the just ridiculous, imperceptibly fast runs over it.
Yeah.
Also the blasting part where he just kind of rasps. The vocals here are quite good. And
the vocals
sort of get out of stereotypical guttural stuff at times. Like that rasp thing was almost like a sort of Black Death vocal.
I will say that Chris on vocals is remarkable. It's like all like just brutal exhaled stuff. He's got a sense of tone to him and a sense of really like ferocity and aggression that is kind of, in the pursuit of more brutal tones within brutal death metal and slam death and stuff. A lot of people have kind of gotten away from just sheer violence in their vocal performance. And Chris is a guy that manages to have those guttural tones, but to really go out, in terms of intensity. And I think that really shines through.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah, so I can hear that, and so the stop-start is the one-da-da-dong parts, right?
Dun-da-dun-da. Yeah, that's totally internal bleeding, like Driven to Conquer era, Extinction of Benevolence era. Really cool stuff that you don't really hear anymore, not even in kind of hardcore bands, really.
You probably do, but like we're just not paying that close attention to hardcore anymore. You get stuff like that. There's a band called Vamachara that I like a lot from California. That
are they still going on?
Yeah, I think they're yeah, I think they have had new records that I've missed, but they do shit like that. Yeah, June 2021 they had one. But I know what you mean. It's so it has those.
Well, it is very 2000s,
Yeah, like what from the 2000s? So internal bleeding is one from the early 2000s. Not stuff like Skinless though, right?
Not quite. Skinless would
that's
definitely
more
be
Slayery and also more syncopated.
Yeah, but I think it would be a lot of like very early deathcore stuff. It would be like early Despised Icon, There's this whole network of, there was this whole network, especially in the 2000s, of bands. It's like, as long as we don't say the term deathcore, it's okay to incorporate. And
what about so what is like the TXDM band? Because you've mentioned that sort of in the margins a few times on this show as being connected to the more hardcore brutal death stuff.
I mean, I think that it would be a different answer for anyone who followed that scene. As far as defining Texas death
stuff
metal
from the early 2000s, say.
I would say
Yeah, because in terms of the more hardcore or death metal-y side of brutal death, the stuff that I'm more inclined to like, aside from the really sort of avant stuff that's out now,
I would say
right. You give me the New York. There's certain kinds of the New York bands like Internal Bleeding. There's the Japanese stuff, and then there's this Texas stuff.
I would say a band like Prophecy. They did a record called Our Domain. I think that was 2003. That's very defining Texas death metal. Ton, Ton, is pretty defining.
That's a good name.
Yeah. And of course, I mean, I'm talking about stuff that's a little bit more underground, but is distinctly Texas. I mean, like Prophecy's Our Domain is a record about the Texas death metal scene. You know, it is our domain.
I see.
And then, of course, you know, Devourment, Molesting the Decapitated, but I'm trying to concentrate on stuff that's more specific to Texas. Insidious Decrepancy, you know, Decadent Orgy of Atrocious Suffering, that sort of thing. Lots of great bands from the Texas scene, but, you know, not a lot of people know about them. This is all 2000s kind of stuff.
Word. Well, you should go to my sample now.
Yeah, let's do it.
So this is Purgation Equation. It's track 6. There's some stuff in the middle of the record that I can't really get my hooks in.
Yeah, a couple of the songs in the middle are much more just like very techy, very straightforward, you know, alienating shit.
From Beneath seems like, track 5, From Beneath in particular, seemed like more of a slam song.
Definitely.
Not like cephalotripsy, you know, ooga booga slams, but like early, more dense and, you know, early slams with more notes in them.
Yeah, well, so, this record is, you know, the tracks from the EP re-recorded with more tracks to make a full length. So you've got kind of a split between older and newer material here.
So the older stuff might be more slammy.
To a degree, I would say,
okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's the only track that really jumped out to me as like, okay, this is kind of slammy. But I would say that was the one I had the hardest time getting into. But Purgation Equation comes after that. And, you know, a thing that we've gotten in some of the brutal death bands that I've liked, and that this band does pretty much as their default setting, is the lawn sprinkler mosh riff.
Let's go.
Yeah. So, yeah, I can almost hum that one. That one actually, like, that one has very kind of clearly defined and memorable riffs, and the cool thing about it is that because they're so complicated, I can't even hum them to myself, so I have to listen to the track. But more than that, you got that sort of the lawn sprinkler feel on a lot of those, like, you know, or the sort of you're moshing like you're driving a truck that's really big, and so the wheel is like, you know, like your entire arm radius.
Yeah.
You know, big one-arm swing in front of you. It's just kind of like the first two riffs in particular. It just starts from a really rapid sort of like rolling double bass barrage and then just settles into the same kind of groove at half the time. That shit is pretty cool. And I was telling you as we were listening, like the blast part about a minute in, takes motifs that are already there from the kind of more chuggy stuff and sort of transforms them into a complicated, cool trem riff. There's a lot of good... Maybe they show up more as the record goes on, but there's a lot of good trem riffs on this.
Yeah, there's...
And by that I mean, like, blast beat and more... In some sense, the whole record is in tremolo, basically. But, like, blast beat and non-muted trem.
Yeah, there's a lot of cool trem stuff across this record. Specifically because Charlie, the guitarist, is not forgetting about... creating meaningful melodic structures even as he's going super tech, doing all these crazy trills and stuff. You know, there's an invested idea to keeping everything within a song contiguous, which is going to be important for the next sample. Another thing that I think is distinct about this band, especially now, this is a very, like, early mid-2000s technique, but is kind of forgotten these days, unfortunately, is really fast, down-picked palm mute riffs. Sort of like slams played way too quickly. You know, breakdowns played way too fast, which is like really aggressive, down-picked palm mute stuff.
Is that like the riff towards the end of that sample? Is that like the riff towards the end of the sample?
I not that one, but there was one toward the middle that was just like a really fucking fast down-picked palm mute riff. Sort of like, these are guys who are not forgetting about Metallica and Megadeth as they make brutal death metal.
So it's like entirely down-picked?
Yeah, from seeing Charlie play, basically... I think that Charlie's philosophy playing guitar is to, if anything can be down-picked, it will be down-picked. And then otherwise it's trem, you know?
So his, like, default eighth note is down-picked.
I believe so, you know?
Cool.
Because it's basically either down pick or tremolo. There's no gray area stuff.
Then I think he was doing that with the riff towards the end, which I was going to say was a perfect sort of middle ground between beat down and a slam. It was a sort of like complicated beat down riff that sort of moved up in a way that a lot of those don't. And it was very kind of like proto slam.
Yeah, no, it's these guys are interesting because these are older guys. You know, I think all the guys in this band.
Before we move to that, explain for non-musicians what it entails to downpick everything.
Oh, well, it's more than twice as hard. You would think it's twice as hard, but it's really like 3.5 times as hard. So, you know, in terms of like palm muted riffs, in black metal, for instance, a lot of the time you'll alternate pick those kind of palm muted riffs because you kind of like that jangle effect.
Right, you sweep one down and then one up, and you're trying to get like continuous flow to it.
Yeah, but for a lot of the death metal guys, they really dedicate themselves to, I want that low E note, or whatever you're tuned to be the attack note on every chord of this riff. So if you listen to a guy like Charlie on this record, you can tell, we're down picking all of this, which is so fucking difficult on the right hand to do consistently.
Because I can downpick everything if I'm doing like a slow break, something that has like a heavy downward kind of doomish breakdown thing in a hardcore song. I might downpick everything. Or I also put them in black metal songs. You know, like I might downpick everything there. But yeah, I remember I have a friend who's a much better musician and was suggesting sometimes the really stompy, hardcore-y black metal, you're actually downpicking everything. And some of the Iljarn-based stuff. Dang, 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 dang. You're like doing it on like the upbeat, but it's like dang, 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 dang.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can't even do that. So to imagine doing this is like insane.
Yeah, and then you get into the guys that are really into brutal death that are dedicated to downpicking, and they're doing it on riffs like. Yeah, it's like, yeah, or faster than that. There's guys
doing the downstroke and winding it back up and going it again at like, at 200 BPM, which again doesn't sound like much until you try it, and then you realize, God. What if you could jerk off that way?
I've been working on that for years. So, The Unclean Mind. Great song. Probably my favorite Perceptions of Torment track. Remember how when we covered that Concrete Winds record late last year, I was talking about bow-like song structures? Mm-hmm. The idea of that you've got a sort of anchor point and everything is sort of going out and coming back into that anchor point. I think that's a consistent thing across this record, and it really comes out on this track. This is one of the old ones from the EP that's been updated. Phenomenal song. So let's listen to, I believe this sample starts with the sort of anchor riff for the whole song, and then it's going to go out and it's going to reel itself back in a really cool way. So yeah, you can see how that sort of proto slam riff, that down,
dude, the way they came back into that at the end, they played two variations on it, right? When they spilled into it out of the blast beat, they started playing that riff with like an opposite time emphasis from the way they normally play.
Yeah, dude, it's so cool.
Into the normal version.
Dude, it's totally out of nowhere. There's like really, I mean, preaching at the fucking choir here. The same shit that I always say about Brutal Death on the show. It's like, it's all about those subtleties. It's all about those little time changes, you know, these little flares that these guys put into the music. I mean, the riffs themselves, obviously, I love, but, you know, the magic is found in those liminal spaces, those little adjustments that make it so much cooler if you're really sitting down and paying attention.
But yeah, tell them about that. Tell them about the bow-like structure, because I cut you off to point out that one last little thing.
Oh, no, you're good. I guess I talked about this the first time when we covered the Concrete Winds record last year. So when I say bow-like, I'm saying that there is a central riff or a central motif, sort of like a chorus, but not functioning in the same way, but rather a riff or a musical idea that is an anchor point that the band moves out from and ends up looping back to. What makes it distinct from a chorus? I mean, more riffs. Usually people will go, you know, in this kind of structure, 3-4 riffs out before looping back into it. And I think this is
it's also just not necessarily, like, catchy. Or it's not catchy in the way that a chorus is, rather. So the anchor riff here is not like I don't know, it's not like a big trem riff, and it's not a regular breakdown. It's a sort of complicated, arcing, semi-slam, right?
Yeah.
And the other thing you pointed out is it's a seed for a lot of stuff that happens during the part where it bows out, right? So that riff has basically the basic idea is this kind of like series of downward chord slides. It kind of like it bears down really hard at the beginning.
Yeah.
It's like that's just a half step at the beginning. It's just like a primitive idea of breakdowns that goes back to Slayer and shit. But they sort of build the entire phrase around that, and then once it like sextuples the speed or whatever, you can still hear those basic descending figures in all the Whiplash trem riffs.
Yeah, and there's also so much...
it goes like... It goes to like...
Well, yeah, and there's also so much like subtle variation that occurs with the drum machine. I assume it's a drum machine, you know. If there's a drummer, well, you know, good on you. But there's a lot of subtle rhythmic variation that gives more juice to a lot of these riffs, kind of in a black metal style, but in a way that like more fundamentally reinterprets the sort of rhythmic emphasis of a lot of these sort of proto-slam riffs. It's really interesting. You know, it's a kind of technique that, again, was very popular in like the mid-2000s, but it's been kind of forgotten these days.
Yeah, so another thing is that, like, this track again, I thought of as one of the obvious highlights and was going to pick it, and then you had also chosen that one. So I think there's something about the unclean mind and immersed in blood that really stands out. And I would say for my personal taste, I find this track, you know, you said in the notes how this is much more legible than a lot of things in this style. These two tracks in particular, I think have that. This song has a bunch of really difficult riffs in it, but it's extremely immediate and catchy in a way that some of the others aren't. So, I mean, I would love to hear more shit like this on a future effort from them.
Yeah, no, I think that's one of the cool things about Perceptions is the relative legibility of these songs. Like, compared to something like, say, Exterminated, which is just completely fucking illegible to anyone who's not already versed in the style. Perceptions, as extreme and aggressive as it is very readable, I would say. There's a certain clarity of form that really sticks out.
Yeah, this does have that, at least in their. I don't always get that from this band, in part because they stand out more to you because you're a connoisseur of the style. I don't always get that from this band if I'm being like really like strict about which parts hook me. But certainly those two tracks do, and then the other tracks that I picked are ones, where I really started paying attention to it. I could also hear that clarity. And presumably a brutal death aficionado, or even just someone who listens to more death metal than I do, might pick that up better than me. Also that track did have some exterminated 16th note runs on it, The Unclean Mind. Some of the more modern New Standard Elite kind of 16th palm mute runs, and they sounded really good. But yeah, let's go to... So this is the, I think the last track before the outro, and in a Smashing Pumpkins tribute, it's called The Killer Within. Okay, I want to slightly retract what I said, because this track is also really immediately catchy to me.
Yeah, this is a really good one.
This might be the most melodic one on the record. This is closer to a, regular death metal or even Black Death sense of melody. Like... The thing that really stands out about it at the beginning is that they do this 6/8 to 4/4 trading, which is something that was conventional in the 90s when everyone in black and death metal was copying from Slayer, but like Altar of Sacrifice or whatever, but is a lot less, at least in black metal, seems to be much less common now. Like, you'll have your song in triple time or your song in 4/4, and there aren't so many sudden drops between the two. The rapid trading at the beginning of this stands out, and I'm not used to hearing that kind of galloping triple time in Brutal Death.
Yeah, I think that's a thing that is kind of essential to, again, like 2000 style Brutal Death. Mm-hmm. I mean, nowadays, you listen to a Brutal Death band, and you're swapping between a shit ton of time signatures very quickly. Or you're just sticking in 4/4.
Right.
But this... there's something to the idea that this middle ground has a lot to offer. Obviously, the guys in this band are... technically extremely proficient, but there's holding back periodically. There's a real sense of musicality that you don't find in a lot of Brutal Death bands. And I think that's what kind of makes this special. You know, this the immediacy, the idea that these are songs that people should be able to mosh to.
Yeah, so structurally here also, like, the other great part of the entire thing is thematically related.
Yeah.
It's, they have that first kind of, like, frantic, you know, brutal death as thrash riff, or they have that rather slower trading. Then they go into the more sort of blasty part, and then they slow down a lot. And they start to get this, like, cascading downward, you know, they get this sort of off-kilter slow chug with this downward cascading melodic riff. And that really sounds like immolation. And it starts to be like, oh, are they going to develop it in this direction? That would be really cool. And then they just stop and key change it to some degree, and then just start playing an even crazier version of the blast riff, which is, again, like, the cool kind of, like, monged shit that 80s thrash bands would do, right? They'd be like, you think it's going to be the cool immolation riff? Canceled. And then even when they go to the slam at the end, the slam is in triple time, which calls back the, it's like an indirect callback of the field at the beginning. It's really, you know, really smart.
You know God made black beautiful. God made Booby beautiful, black and strong. And when Booby knocks some fools out, Booby gonna knock them out with black knights on his feet. Ain't that right? And I'ma smile when I do. Yeah. I'm distinguished now.
Hey, Booby.
What?
You didn't live.
Come on, man. This is God-given. Only thing I gotta do is just show up.
Yeah, a superhero in the flesh. Even at my worst, I'm the best. For the finish, I stretch. When they advance me this check, could've fought my way to heaven, but I blow it on my neck instead. What you expect when you ain't had shit and they ain't paying half of what you asking? Couldn't even see the pussy even if it's casting. Now the hoes are down for taking pictures cause you flashing. You can't even imagine, maybe Kim Kardashian. #1 song in the Grammy, now I'm smashing. Maserati crashing, swerving through the traffic. Rapid round the pole, sell a meal off the tragedy. I defy gravity, flyer than I have to be. Talking to the Lord, I can't stay, who gon' say hip-hop after me? It's like a torn ACL to an athlete. Booby Miles Friday light capture me in my hometown.
Can you see the coast represent on Mississippi, land? Can you see the dirty coast represent on Mississippi, land? 300 my stomping ground, 300 my stomping ground, 300 my stomping ground. King City, town, hometown.
Yeah, it's just a rock in the cooler. Not a day off, but I'm still Ferris Bueller. Winners never lose, so how dare you confuse us? They quote what I spit like Confucius. He say, she say, rumors all day. The rap game is high school and life's a hallway. Like what click you in, the Beamer or the Benz, the Bentley or the Lambo, like here we go again. Don't sit at my table, VIP, I got this. You ain't popping champagne after every game, then don't pop shit. Homecoming queen with my picture in her locket, but I know what's up with her hands in my pockets. They love me cause my swag is so jockish. Freshman year saw a ring like I'm boxing. You voted most likely to never ever top this. I'm Michael Jordan, Dennis Rodman in my hometown.
Can you see the